On today's episode of Successful Scales, I sat down with Diane Adams, who has a storied career lasting nearly 3 decades in the sales professional space. We talked about everything that relates to sales, and I would say most importantly, the takeaways are that it is people selling to other people and how to build relationships. If you're thinking about sales as a transaction, then you're already behind the 8 ball. And this episode is for any of those sales professionals who really want to understand how to approach niching down, focusing, establishing themselves as a leader in the space. I hope you get a lot out of this, just like I did. Enjoy the app.
Welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I talk to world-class professionals on what it takes to scale successful businesses. I dive deep asking questions to people who are running unicorn businesses, to raising funds, to buying businesses, mergers and acquisitions, IP and patent law, what is to manage performance management. I mean, the list goes on. The idea really is, how do I create knowledge and learning for you guys listening in? And of course, myself, getting the floor with people who I, in many cases, would never dream to share a room with. Before we jump into the episode, I've got to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, over at Global Wide Advisors, a leading digital consumer products investment bank focused on optimizing the sales process. An incredible team, always happy to pick up the phone and educate you or anyone about the sales process and what you should really consider, and can obviously help take you to market or even acquire businesses. I ring them for just about everything these days. Us over at Multiply Me, we are the end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, helping find better talent and onboarding them effectively. And last but not least, Escala, our management consultancy focused on process improvement, where we help build better systems for your business. That's all the ads you're going to get from me, ladies and gentlemen. The rest is all about learning. I hope you really enjoy and get as much out of these sessions as I do, sitting face to face with some of the world-renowned leaders in their respective fields, asking them the tough questions that they're not often asked. All right, Diane, welcome to an episode of Successful Scales. I cannot tell you how long this session has been building, how much time I've wanted to sit here and have you all to myself and ask you all of the questions, because what you've achieved up until this point is nothing short of remarkable, and I'm certain that the audience are going to get a lot out of this. But before I try and do an injustice here and talk about your illustrious career, I'd love to pass it over to you and have you tell those listening a little bit about yourself and your journey and how we've ended up at this moment in time.
Awesome. Thank you, Yanni. Same. I'm so stoked to be here with you finally, right? At long last, to talk about all of the things. For your listeners, my name is Diane Adams. I'm humbled by this intro. I'll give you a little bit of history about myself, and maybe just bring it down just a notch, Yanni. I've been in business development for 27 years. I'm telling on myself right now, if my hair didn't already, okay? I'm really super passionate about working with business owners, entrepreneurs and small business owners particularly, though I've worked in large scale enterprise deals also. And I really grew up in financial services. So if I'm being real transparent, I always wanted to be a teacher, Yanni. You know, that was the thing. I loved standing up front and talking and helping people learn, right? Helping people learn and grow. And it just so happened that my senior year of college, as I was just getting ready to go into that master's degree program, that life just decided that Diane was going to be a mother. And so very quickly, as happens, right, the gears shifted pretty quickly, and I had a degree in English, folks. Okay, so for those of you who are like, business development, how do you get into that? You grind it out, right? You grind it out. You find your spot. So teaching was just a natural spot for me. And when I entered into financial services, I was gravitating towards those spots. So for 10 years, I was at Transamerica Insurance and Investments. I worked in all manner of operations and landed a sales director job, which is where I found my sweet spot. And then when that company moved to Iowa, I'm in Kansas City, and I said, we have enough snow here, folks. I think I'll stay put. And to make a very long story short, I was going to open a salon and spa. and a mentor reached out to me and said, what, I won't use the words here, what in the world were you thinking? And suggested perhaps I do some business development consulting. And I've been doing that for over 17 years and absolutely love it. That mentor was not wrong, though I'm sure my hair would look better had I bought that salon. And so here we are today.
Amazing. I was on mute for part of that, and I was just sitting here. I know, Diane, you could see me laughing. I don't know what the cuts will look like at the end of the video, but I definitely enjoyed that, probably more so than I should have. But while I was listening, I was taking a few notes on top of what I know about you. And, just to start off, it's really interesting to hear sort of your entry to that journey. You are someone who is, for the last 17 years in particular, clearly supporting entrepreneurs and people who are looking to grow their business, outside of the corporate environment. And so there's definitely something that I want to come back to. But it's so interesting, I think, for a lot of us, what's the saying? We had a plan and then God had other ideas. I think that's how it goes. And so, you looking to go down this path of teaching and then having to find your way into this industry and really double down and provide for the family and grow is really interesting. I'm just curious at that point, like what were the drivers in terms of the attraction to that specific space? Because you spent effectively your entire professional career in this space, in the financial sector, and then obviously in business development. But what was it that first led you there, and what's kept you there?
So I'm going to be real transparent and honest, because I feel like sometimes folks want to make the journey sound so much sexier than it actually is, right? So that's right. So I'm in Kansas City. We had the company Transamerica moved into Kansas City just a couple of years before I was graduating from college. And I had heard rumblings of this Fortune 500 type of a company being in town, which was very unique and amazing. And when I had decided that I was not going to graduate school, that I was in fact going to go seek an actual job, I was looking for something that was going to allow me to grow, provide insurance, start with a decent paycheck, do those things, right? Train me up while I was in that role. But really, I just needed to get the job, Yanni, right? I just needed to get the job. Once I was in the building, it became apparent very quickly that because of the scale of the enterprise, there would be opportunity for me to push my way up that ladder and I don't want to say easily, but methodically and strategically. So someone had said to me, and when I said, well, I guess I'm not going to graduate school, and they said, well, listen, you're pretty sharp. Get into that building and you'll decide what you want to do. And when you have the attitude that you can do that, you usually can.
So I think, like teacher Diane, I think therein lies the first lesson. Honestly, I think so many entrepreneurs are pushed down a path where, do what you love and never work a day in your life. And,
yes.
And you can let it fly off the handle here, Diane. It's absolute bullshit.
Thank you.
There's aspects in business that I love. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do is to get into our quote unquote zone of genius and the area that we add the most value. But when you're talking about a startup, when you're talking about, growing a business and being a business owner, there's going to be a lot of stuff that is not necessarily in your sweet spot, particularly early on. And I think you need to make those hard calls and those decisions. And, I'd say not follow the money to a point where you're selling your soul and you're, in, binary options and you're doing some really shady shit. But, to a point where you have to make good decisions. And I think one of the things that I'm learning more and more, and I wish I'd learned these lessons 5 and maybe even earlier, 10 years ago, is that, especially when you're a bootstrapped founder or running your own business, it's about actually building profitable businesses quickly and taking money off the table as quickly as possible. And I don't think enough people talk about that. And I think as well, I've always had this mindset of I'm just going to reinvest everything and I'm going to pay myself last. And I think at a point, it leads to burnout, and you always need to find these win-win situations where you're also looking after yourself. And to sort of change gears a second here, you obviously grinded it out, to a degree, and you went through the corporate ladder and you sort of made those decisions. And I'm certain that you learned quite a bit there, but it seems to me like after 10 years, you spent, nearly 20 years now in an area that you are both really good at in learning those skill sets and ultimately going to this consultative path. So I'm just curious, at that point in your career, what had you make that leap? You said the mentor, a mentor of yours, you were talking about opening a hair salon. So I'd love that anecdotal story, but I'd love to understand like what drove you to the consulting and how did that come to be for someone who's considering moving down that path? Like what are the considerations that they should be making and how can they make that a reality?
You just uncorked Diane, Yanni. Thank you for asking the question. But really though, it's a legit question though, right? And not only how do you shift from a corporate Fortune 500 sort of super standardized, right? Super systematic, very structured, sort of patriarchal kind of entity to let's not just totally skip over it, right? That leapfrog moment of my mind being at that salon, right? I had hired an architect. We had done the designs. I'd already talked with the utility. Like you were in it. I was in it. So what was the thing that made me say, I already spent $30,000 on these plans and I've already like almost signed this lease. Like, why am I pivoting like this? And why did I make the decision? Because the decision was seamless. I did not need to go meditate on this. I didn't need to talk to anyone about this. And it's because I knew who I was in my role at that time. And the timing is wild. That was 2007. In 2005, I had seen my very first business coach on stage. I'd never seen a business coach on stage. Ever. This woman, we were in Colorado Springs, we're at a women's event. I had already been doing business development for years with advisors, and I had always found the same sticking points, which was almost always mindset. So I watched this coach, and she did a real simple disc sort, right? So if anyone's familiar with disc personality, right, just did a quick sort. But watching what happened in that room with the individuals as she let them feel seen, as she let them feel related to, as she put them in groups of other like-minded people in the room. This happened in 3 minutes, okay? But I was watching all of it happen, and I was watching her. And I thought, you know what? That's what I'm missing when I'm going out to these offices and I'm training on advanced planning concepts and I'm empowering, their team to have better operations. But I go back to a firm and 6 weeks later, they're going right back to what they were doing before. Why? Because of their mindset. Maybe they had the skill set, maybe they had the tool set, but their mindset was stuck. So when I was posed with the question, what are you doing with this nail salon, right? I already had an entrepreneurial mindset. I already had the skill set and the tool set to go be a fantastic business development consultant. I'd already done it successfully for years. It was just a pivot away from a corporate structure to an entree structure. And to have the confidence to be able to do that was all mindset.
Yeah, amazing. And I think for a lot of people, they're sort of going through trying to make good decisions. And until you have these, like almost epiphany moments. And I think for a lot of us, at least for me, I feel like it's happening, not that I'm later in life, but, I would have hoped that it would have happened earlier in my career. It's like, I guess maybe my personality type is I am someone who can be quite comfortable in a space that's not necessarily their perfect position, but I'll just sort of deal with it. I can take on a lot of the stress, and ultimately I don't realize how good things can be when you can build a really strong supporting team and function around you and bring in, business partners and co-founders and things like that can really supplement your skill set. The thing that's really sort of got me thinking as well, it's very rare that I get to speak with someone who has been, delivering obviously a variety of different capabilities and elements around a business. But, in my experience, you would have to be, and from what I know of you, one of the one of the most impressive BD, business development people. And so for me, I would like to just pose the question, like, what in your mind dictates or is an indicator of like what a good business development person is? What do they do? And, what's their sort of natural, zone of genius, if you will?
Yeah, sure. And you're, again, humbling. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's funny when you are doing something you're super passionate about and you love and you hear what you're doing reflected back at you, it feels different, right? But I have seen a lot of things over the past 27 years of doing this. There are some very consistent things in the way that humans operate. And young, and not young in age, young in experience, business development folks, a lot of times are looking for the transaction, right? They're really looking for the lever or the moment that's going to move, and they're having conversations over in one aspect over here, but there's a part of their mind that's working in the background like a poor listener, because that's what they're doing. Right? They're being a poor listener because they're strategizing as they're listening. So it's because they're really seeking the transaction. And so instead, really pivoting and looking at the human being in front of you versus the business, looking at the human being in front of you and really leaning into the relationship and understanding that there are really only two kinds of people. There are people in business who want to win-win, and there are people in business who want to win-lose. And you have to know who you're talking to. I know who I am. I'm always a win-win, always want to win-win, always. And I think that's what makes me such a likable, trustable, lovable consultant. But at the same time, you have to be able to do that with the person that you're working with. If you're a win-lose, I need to lose for you. I need to be okay losing for you. I need to be really comfortable. And that's, again, my mindset and my self-esteem and confidence in what I'm doing has to be very high to allow you to win and win and win. And I'm almost self-deprecating as the consultant, being like, you're so awesome. If we're winning together, if it's a win-win relationship, then I know we can walk together. I can hold your hand. We can partner together. We can push and pull each other as consultant and business owner. But it's really that simple, right? It's shifting away in your experience from being transactional, which comes from experience, getting your feet on the ground and walking it. I will never forget, Yanni, when I was at Transamerica at one point, I was a new sales director and I was just so hungry. And I was like, guys, I just really want to be doing what you're doing. Why will you not just send me on the road and let me do it? And they said, look, kid, you're super passionate and you're very intelligent and you do have the tool set. The skill set needs to be developed. You've got the skills. They're raw skills. Did you hear what you just said, Diane? You're raw, right? Like, listen to the pitch you just gave us. We need to smooth you out and we need to pour into you and we need to get you ready and teach you to be relational, right? Did you see what I was doing with them? I was pushing the transaction with them. I was so young, I didn't realize. And so really, it's just, for me, it always comes back to, who is the person sitting in front of me? Where is their pain? What is the pain that is causing them to want to come and talk to me? I'm a very compassionate BD, right? But I'm also hardcore. I'm going to hug you and say, I see it and I understand. And then I'm going to kick you in the head and say, let's roll, right? And if they're transactional, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. But if they're relational and I don't work with everyone, right? I don't work with everyone because if they're not at that place, there's no point for me yet.
I love it. Yeah. It's so interesting to me to hear that spoken out loud. And obviously I think a big reason why the two of us connected as quickly and as deeply as we did is that we share that same philosophy that there can only be win-win, because if someone is losing, that's not a relationship that will ever last. And I think it's probably the most high value advice, not just for BDs, but for any single person in life in general. I think it's like a life philosophy. The thing that I like to say to people is like my personal core value and my philosophy is that my sort of goal is to give without the expectation of reciprocation. If you can enter into a relationship looking at how you can support someone first, then the entire paradigm shifts, but it shifts even more so when at no point are you sitting there and you are saying, well, because I've done this, then they're going to give me this. And I think if you can sort of release that from your mindset, incredible things happen. I think firstly, just at your soul level, but ultimately, I think you will be rewarded in whatever that looks like for you. So really, really sound advice. I guess the next sort of thought that I have here is that, for people who are going down this path, that's the mindset, right? That is how they need to be in business, and that's how they approach it. But what happens when, I think like one of the hardest things for most businesses is, let's take the mantra and the philosophy out of it, is how do I actually approach winning new business? How do I engage in a prospect that might not be interested in, what are the things that might work for them? And I know we've spoken a little bit about trade shows and things like that, but I'd love to just hear from your experience, like what are the ways in which you've seen it work the best? And for anyone who's trying to grow their business and they're not quite there, and let's say that they can take on that mindset, how do they then apply it to actually drive meaningful growth? Yep.
It's such a good question. And I think it's the hardest place to start, right? Because people want to just pour money into something. Business owners sometimes think, I'm just going to put this budget item line in for maybe marketing, right? Or a sales director or something like that. And it's going to solve my prospecting problem. It almost never does, right? It almost never does. Foundationally speaking, I love to go into a firm, and I don't care if they're 5 days old, 50 days old, 50 years old, right? Maybe it's even a second gen business I'm coming into, and I'm helping this young new business owner like take dad or mom's business and refashion it to themselves. And it's always like, I'm going to say the standard things, Yanni, and everybody go ahead and roll your eyes. It's totally fine. Like identifying that target first is super critical in understanding what you're building. Who do you want to play with? Who do you want to talk to all the time? Who do you want to spend your days with? Who do you want to work with, right? The reason that I feel like I'm successful in business development is because I grew up an entrepreneur. We may have never talked about this, but my first job was as a jeweler's apprentice to my grandfather, right? This man came back from World War II, had a second grade education, went and became a clockmaker, then a watchmaker, then a diamond setter, right? And then opened one of the most successful trade shops. He didn't open a retail shop because he knew we would never win that business, right? But what business did we win? The business of the retailers. And it was my first experience to B2B and what you could achieve. I was 13 years old, okay? 13. Wow. But I understood prospecting because I asked my grandfather, why in the world would we not just open a storefront like Helzberg's or Fred Meyer's or Tivel or the other organizations that were in town? And it's because he knew these people intimately, and he knew that to compete against them would be to lose. Better to partner with them in a way that we could do business. And we all what? Win-win. We all win, right? So when I'm looking at prospecting, I always think of my grandfather, right? And how he was like, look, I'm not going to go try to win business that I know I'm going to have to bleed out and spend and never see my face. Why are we doing that, right? Where is the need? Who is the target? What can you do? And then from that, it's not, again, I'm going to say, hold on to your dollars. Just wait just a second, right? Like, don't get impatient with this process. This is an actual process, right? Where we're going, I'm not going to bury the lead. Where we're going is multi-level marketing, right? Not an MLM, but pinwheel marketing using all the levers. But you have to start with your foundation. Who are you? What are you? What are you offering? How are you solving? Because you need to have a presence, right? And I'm talking, and we know this, your website, your one sheets, your socials, right? Go out and network in your area and your sphere. Just get those words out so that when you're actually pitching a prospect and they're vetting you out, you're real. Everything you said is real. It's verifiable, right? You're credible. People in your community are talking about you. But if you're putting the cart before the horse, right? The horse is going to run you over. It's just going to happen. It's going to happen. So it's really about patience, strategy, right? Being very deliberate in what you're doing. And having worked with entrepreneurs for almost 30 years, I can tell you that one of the reasons I love it is because they're passionate and they're almost never deliberate.
Yep.
Because they're so excited about their zone of expertise. Right? And they're probably not going to be a great business owner. Let's figure out how to let them do what they're an expert at and get this foundational business stuff built so they can just go do that, right?
100%. 100%. Yeah, I'm picking up all that you're putting down here, and much of it is applicable to me, unfortunately. But, one thing, obviously, in the conversations that we've had that I've sort of understood in your journey is being that, to call you just a BD would be doing you an injustice. You've been able to first come in and help financial service solution providers and people in even a bit more broad sense of the word here grow their business. But there's been other areas inside of the business that you've been able to, from operationalizing it to the marketing component to the actual service delivery component. And, one thing that's just continuing to come up for me when we talk about that previous topic, understanding your ICP, your ideal client profile. One of the things I think that a lot of people get trapped in, myself included, is that it's about growth, and growth means hitting other verticals, and growth means, going really wide. And I think too many people get caught in this trap of, we can deliver value to everyone and therefore we're going to be the everything to everyone. And that's just not realistic. But I think one of the smart things that you've been able to do is really focus in on who your ICP is and then find the next solution and the next solution. So you become this effectively like one-stop shop to support them. And so I'm just curious, I imagine it all started with growth, but how did you find your way into expanding those capabilities and what led you down that path?
It's awesome. It's interesting. And I think probably folks will relate to this. It was a client. It was a client dragging me down the path, right? So I had a huge IMO client. They were a team of 14, but they were supporting over 100 advisors without standard operating procedures, without really any kind of standard marketing. Each individual in the organization was acting as their own business, right? Essentially. And it was okay for then. It was okay for right then. But what needed to happen is they needed to provide some BD to their clients, right? So how do we scale them while they're scaling their client? It was such an interesting challenge. And what I found was, to your point, we needed to go in and do those foundational things where we were, and I literally writing marketing copy first. Let's write some marketing copy. Let's publish some websites. Okay, cool. What's the next thing? You guys are all doing different things when we're submitting business. Let's standardize those things, right? Are you coaching people on sales performance? Maybe we need to do that, right? And it was just layering in. Really, it's so interesting today, and I'll get to that in just a second, but I provided sales performance coaching, marketing copy. I was ghostwriting books for financial advisors. We were training operations teams how to create service level agreements, right? We were working with managers and teaching them what team engagement was, what leadership development looked like. And at the same time, looking at state requirements for the SEC because it's a highly regulated industry, right? So really, yes, digging in as a business development professional and just really going through all of those things methodically, but then coming back as a coach and understanding where I would get hung up every time is mindset. So yes, operationalizing the business. If you just want to simple it up, right? We operationalize the business. We make sure everything's automated and streamlined, apply tech where we can, all the things we all know we need to be doing. But the thing that we don't typically do is go back once we've launched and implemented and made sure that everyone is feeling good in the motions. Everyone's measuring data. What needs to be readjusted, right? Are you guys talking to each other? Has it turned into a relational office versus these 14 separate transactions? This firm now has 800 employees. They have 3 different buildings. They own a TV station, right? They're taking over their city. But it's because they started strategically operationalizing each of the areas, but that's not how it started. It started with, we need to attack each of the areas in an elementary way to create that credible foundation for clients to see and prospects to see.
And therein lies the magic. When you talk about, the hockey stick graph and the exponential growth curve and it sounds like they might have been doing, a degree of acquisitions in terms of their growth. To start running, a television station is probably not what they started off with when they were thinking about, financial professionals and how they, operate. And I think that, the big takeaways that I have and some of the things that have really been coming up for me in the conversations that I've been having, just generally speaking with some of the most successful people, at least, in the conversations that I'm having of late, is that you're becoming the very best at the one thing that you do that is generating the free cash that allows you to continue to just improve that service delivery to a point where you become effectively unbeatable. And the common threads that I've seen, and I think not too dissimilar to likely the institution that you're talking about, is that they found a way to build a business that supports the businesses that they're supporting so that they're making more money that's being fed back to making them more money, that's allowing you to create this, perpetual flywheel of material growth that then everything ceases to become, out of reach. Everything is really within reach at that point. And I think like the key lessons that I take from that as an entrepreneur is that focus on the one thing that you are going to be able to win at, build that to the very best until, your EBITDA like very, very positive. And then you can start to think about how do we start deploying this capital, or how do we start really, I think more importantly, before the deployment of that capital, is how do we create ancillary solutions that are going to benefit the audience that we're targeting. And so if you can aim small when it comes to your niche, your ability to grow with them and have this lifetime value of partnership is really what the win-win ultimately looks like.
It is. And let me tell you something, Yanni, they were resistant from the get-go. Okay. So I feel like we would be doing a disservice not to speak to the natural resistance that happens when we're scaling and growing our businesses. And each of these areas that we talked about, ghostwriting books, writing marketing copy, doing event planning, offering events for all of these things were resisted initially, right? We're not service providers. We're this. Well, what is your end goal? To help these financial advisors be really great business owners. Okay, cool. Your end goal. The path to get there may need to change. And if you're not flexible in your path and getting to that end destination, let me tell you, you're probably never going to get there, right? Because the weather's going to change. The appetite of the consumer is going to change. And so the moment that they became wildly successful, right? The moment that I knew what was going to happen, right? Was when they stopped saying, well, we're not going to be a service provider, right? They stopped saying that. And they said, all right, let's listen to the services these folks need so that they can be experts in planning like we need them to be, right? And it was all around business development. But they were resistant about offering those services initially. The second that they shifted their mindset and they said, okay, we're willing to do this, let's just try, the revenue jumped. But not only did the revenue jump, the relationships deepened so much that when I was at an event, still talking with these folks, right? Still supporting these folks. We were at an event together a couple of months ago, and these folks, it was like being at a high school reunion or a family reunion, right? Because they have turned this into a relational business. It's just a beautiful thing. But that's not to say the natural things didn't happen when they were starting. The very natural things happened, right? They saw the need, they kind of went towards it, and then they were like, oh, and then they pulled back from it, right? Even though they saw it, the need kept coming to them, kept knocking on the door, and finally they opened it, And I think a lot of us do that, where we're like, okay, I've identified my prospect. I've identified the strategy. Here's our business plan. Now we're going, right? It's the set of architecture I had for the salon. What if I would have said, I already spent $30,000 on this stuff. I'm not walking away from this. Right?
Yep.
It would have been a completely different situation. Not to say that we wouldn't have won in that situation. I'm sure I would have. But it would not have been the same passion and excitement and life, frankly, the lifestyle that I've led, it would have been completely different.
And I think that's a massively important lesson because, I would say like from where we sit today as a company of 85 people, where we have our, we run loosely on the EOS methodology where you have your 10-year target, your 3-year picture and your 1-year plan, and you're setting out these goals. Things crop up and situations change, and you need to read the market's appetite for certain things. And to your point, if you're sitting and you're so rigid that you can't take on market feedback, and you're saying, I'm building this because I know, and none of us, at least in my business, is Steve Jobs. I know I'm going to build them what they need that they don't even know yet. Essentially, I think it's a really important lesson, is that even if like an expensive lesson that I've learned, we've dumped about $400,000 into technology that we were building over the course of a handful of years. And while we use the technology, so it's not zero, there was a much smarter way from a focus perspective, and from a way in which we could have leveraged an agency to build it maybe for a fraction of the price, and never have to actually project manage that entire thing and build a team of 12. And there's a lot of things that happen there. So I think, from a lessons perspective, is don't get married to the idea of what you think is going to be your reality without assessing both the market, but also where your passions and your desires lie, because pretty quickly you can find yourself $400,000 out of pocket without as much as you'd like to show for it.
It's so true. And then also too, even beyond that, and folks who are probably a little bit further in their business or careers or whatever will get this. Like, sometimes you look up from your keyboard and you're like, what is this life that I've created for myself? And is this the life that I actually want to be living, right? Is it time for me to just take a second and assess, like, what do I want? Because sometimes what happens is we're grinding so hard to get that momentum, right? Initial inertia is hard to generate. It takes a lot of thought, a lot of work, a lot of energy. Once we do, and we're running on top of that ball that's finally moving, right? Sometimes before it stops, we don't know what we've just created. And it's real hard, especially if you've invested a lot of money or brought on people, to say, ooh, this isn't really who we are, or who I am, or where I want to go, or, man, we've seen a massive market shift. I love that you brought up Steve Jobs. I'm going to be fully transparent. I just watched that movie again last night, the Michael Fassbender one. And I love the moment where he's being interviewed. I don't know if it's Wired. I don't know who's interviewing him, but they're talking about, we'd really like to hear what you think about your industry moving so quickly. And he's like, yours is about to start moving pretty quickly too, buddy. Because he was talking about the media, right? And, this is years and years ago, but it's just so interesting to see visionary at work, right? So I think that I'm real great at details, and I'm super fantastic at logistics. Like, I can manage your project all day long. But what sets me apart as a business development consultant, and let's even just get those words out of our mouth, someone who you would want to sit down with and just talk about your business with, right? Is just the focus on vision. What is your vision? Why are you doing this? What sparked you to do? And if it's money, that's fine. Don't shy away from saying, I want my gold Rolex and I want my gold. That's fine. Like, just own it. Because if you do, people will see the authenticity, and you will too, and you'll know how to move on it. But a lot of times we lose the vision when we get caught up in the daily, right? We have the vision when we start, and we start grinding it out. And then we get so far along, and 3 years later, we're like, that's not what I meant to build. Okay, then maybe it's time to start taking some parts off, right? And reorganizing things. Or maybe not. Maybe it's time to start reorganizing yourself. And maybe it's just a gut check. But if you're not doing assessments yourself as a business owner with a coach or a business partner, and I would say probably not your business partner even, right? Like someone outside of your business where you can really sit down and have some objective conversations and open conversations about what's going on in your brain, you're going to be so much further ahead of just honestly your own self, right? It's the best way to get out of your own way. But you have to bring it. You have to trust people to come in and talk to you about those things.
Some of the best advice yet, because honestly, I think so many people, and I'm again guilty of this, like listening and chatting with you, it makes me reassess and say, we're building these 10-year visions for the business. Why aren't I investing more time in how I want to live my life and at what stages I want to live my life? And you get so caught up, I always feel like you never really feel like you're at that state of inertia, even though, you've got a whole team around you and you're doing all of these things. It's always that mindset, not hustle. That's not my mindset. I think that that's a really, that can be a really toxic one for entrepreneurs, is that they're in that just hustle and grind and you'll get there. I think you need to be quite strategic about these things, but especially, for someone like me, when I'm getting, I'd say, closer and closer to my zone of genius and the things that I'm passionate about and that I can do all day and that bring me energy rather than take away my energy, you also need to assess and say, well, how much time do I want to be investing in work? And I'm raising small kids now. Like, you have to take that time to really assess, because you're not getting that time back. And, I know you made some, I think, pretty epic decisions early on with your son's life and the decisions you made. And I draw a lot from that, and having conversations with people who are further along that road in making good decisions on how they want to live their life. I think for a lot of people, they need to your point, take that moment and reassess and evaluate, is this how I want to be living my life? I realize, Diane, we're coming up right on time here, and I think we're going to have to do a number 2 and a number 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a 10. But I'd love to just ask, for aspiring consultants, right? And I think that there's sort of two tracks to this question. One is, what's your thought on people just launching in to being consultants right off the bat? And 2, at what point is it right? And what are the things that might attract someone to actually being a consultant?
It's so fun. I'm so going to again, call myself out on this one. So how do you know when is a good time to become a consultant? And then what do I think about people who just launch into this? You can use the word coach too, because I have the same opinions about this. And folks, these are just opinions. Okay, to be clear. So I'll never forget, we had a consultant come into Transamerica when I was super young on the job. And I watched them for a week work with some of the VPs, and they flew in some C-suite folks. And I was like, I can absolutely do that all day. And I knew it. I can do that all day long. And I went up to the consultant and I said, why wouldn't I just start doing this right now? I could absolutely, so arrogant, right? Why wouldn't I just do that? And it was an older gentleman, and he started laughing and he said, how long have you been in your role? And I was like, a few years. And he was like, and did you plan on doing this job out of college? And I was like, no. And he's like, so you're still figuring it out? Yeah. And he's like, do you really think that's a good space to be coaching other business owners? And I was just like, well, and you try to rationalize where you are, but all he was trying to say was, you're very young. The 3 things you need: mindset, skill set, tool set. I didn't have any of it. I thought I did, but by thinking I did, I clearly did not. Right? So I think that the first thing is, it's like, okay, you want to be a consultant. What is the zone of expertise that you're leaning on that makes you believe you're going to be a successful consultant, right? And then I always tell people, go pitch it to somebody. Go pitch it to somebody who's your friend, because guess who's hardest on you? Your buddies and your family. They're so hard on you, right? But typically speaking, we're wanting to go be a consultant before we're ready to be a consultant, right? When we're just like, oh, that looks like a cool gig, or I want the freedom, I want, right? All the things you think being a consultant are, and they're not, right? And then on the flip side of that, it's like, okay, cool. Now I am a consultant. Am I in the right space that I need to be in? Again, to your point, you can't be rigid in any of this. You have to be flexible, and you need to be willing to go in and put in the time. So if I want to be a consultant, I need to figure out who do I want to be consulting with? And I better dang well know that business. I'm a consultant in the financial services space particularly, and I work across industries, right? But I'm real well suited to be in the financial services space, because it is a very complicated, small niche that requires a high level of expertise. And so I know if I go into that space, when I'm talking about business development, I'm so much more powerful because I understand their zone of genius, right? So if you're not at that level of zone of genius that you're going to be talking about, so this is the chicken and the egg. How do you become a business development consultant if you've never gone and done it? Right? How do you do that? So the way I was able to do that was I had a W-2 job for 10 years where I learned how to do that. I also could have gone to school, and I did. I took a bunch of certification classes. I became a coach, right? I did a lot of stuff. But you're hearing the activity that's in there, right? It wasn't just going and buying a domain and some business cards and then going to a networking meeting, which you absolutely can do. You can do that if you have the confidence, but it's like, okay, we're 15 minutes in. What are we talking about now? And if you can't get past that 15 minutes, it's probably not the time to be a consultant.
Sound advice, and probably the thorn in my side, let's say politely, when I see a lot of these coaches out there where they're trying to give advice for things where their life isn't in a place where I look up to them. I think like one of the best pieces of advice that I can ever remember receiving when I was looking, at these people and what they were doing was, never take advice from someone whose place you don't want to be in. And I think like when you look for a mentor, I think that a really important thing is to say, who am I modeling myself on? What does their life look like? And the same is for a consultant, and the same is for a coach, and the same is for anyone who you're going to look to draw from their experiences is this where I want to go? They're going to be able to shortcut my learning curve considerably. And I think it's really cool. I mean, we're not going to have time to talk about it on this episode, but on the next one, I definitely want to dive into mentors. It sounds like you've had one for probably 20 years by the sounds of your first experience. And I think it's a really interesting topic, not to open up right now, but it's that push-pull of like, having enough humility to say, I don't have all the answers, which I think for a lot of younger entrepreneurs, they lack, but also understanding who to pick and what aspect. Is it specific around key topics and areas that you're bringing a whole slew of consultants in, or is it general? But I'm not going to open that up now. You guys are going to have to listen to the next episode, and we'll probably pick up from there. But Diane, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I've definitely learned some great things. I've validated a lot of things as well, and I hope everyone listening in has gotten as much value out as I have. So thank you very much.
Oh, and thank you too. I'm so grateful to be able to share even just one or two nuggets, right? Because that's what helped me, is just at the right time, from the right person, hearing the right thing that moved me towards the goal. So hopefully that happens for some folks today.
I would be shocked if it wasn't the case. Thank
Fantastic.
you so much.